I don't think we as a field have really solved for circularity in the supply chain. And we have all the tools and we have all the approaches and we have all the brain power to do it, but I don't think we've ever been asked and challenged to solve this specific set. And I'm really excited for when we get started.
Welcome to this event by the MacArthur Foundation, where we develop and promote the idea of a circular economy and where we work with key actors like businesses, policymakers, institutions, and academia to mobilize system solutions at scale. My name is Laura, and I am a project manager here at the Foundation, and I will be your host for this session. Today, we are going to be exploring the link between supply chains and the circular economy. And we'll be answering questions like, how can the circular economy help supply chain leaders build resilient operations, reduce costs, or cut greenhouse gas emissions? We'll also be exploring what circular supply chains are and how they are different from those that have been built and designed to fit a linear economy. We will also look at the implications that building circular supply chains could have for those organizations that are actively looking at rethinking their operations. So, please use the chat. We would love to see your comments and questions, and towards the end, I will have a look and maybe bring some to our speakers, because I'm not alone here today. I have with me three fantastic guests. I have Andres from the MacArthur Foundation, Deborah from the Circular Supply Chain Network, and Douglas from the Association for Supply Chain Management. So to get us started, I'm gonna ask each one of you a brief question. Please keep it brief, because we have a lot to cover today. So, Andres, could you tell us a bit more about what you do at the Foundation and also why you like the topic of supply chains?
Sure, and thanks for having me. I'm Andres, I'm a senior research analyst here at the Foundation, and I was part of the team that developed this white paper together with Deborah here from the Circular Supply Chain Network. And what excites me about this topic is really the opportunity that supply chain professionals have to turn those big ambitions that organizations have nowadays on the circular economy and turn them into practical day-to-day operations. So really going from ambition to action and the role that supply chain professionals can play.
Nice. I'm sure that's going to come up as well many times in this conversation. Deborah, could you tell us briefly what the Circular Supply Chain Network is and why you love supply chains?
Briefly. Sure thing. Thanks for having me today, Laura, and it's a pleasure to be here in person with both of you. The Circular Supply Chain Network is a space for supply chain professionals to come together and explore what the circular economy means for us. We established ourselves 5 years ago, as a completely free and open space. So that's the purpose we're serving, and we're absolutely delighted to be partnering with you and also with Douglas and the team at the Association for Supply Chain Management. What excites me the most about supply chains and circular supply chains, I was making the joke that I've been working with you all now for almost a year, and I'm not sure I've completely shared all the reasons why I'm excited, but I'll pick just one, which is that I don't think we as a field have really solved for circularity in the supply chain. And we have all the tools and we have all the approaches and we have all the brain power to do it, but I don't think we've ever been asked and challenged to solve this specific set. And I'm really excited for when we get started.
It's a big challenge. And Douglas, our guest online, could you tell us briefly what the Association for Supply Chain Management is and why are you also passionate about this topic?
Great. Thank you, Laura, and appreciate you allowing me to join. I'm sad that I'm not sitting in the same room with my friends today because we do share the mission, and the mission of ASCM is to make the world better through supply chain. So this integration of circular economy is just such a huge part of meeting that mission. We at ASCM are the largest NGO focused on supply chain globally. We operate in more than 60 countries, and I think by the end of this month, we'll be celebrating having now over 50,000 members across the globe. We are also the intellectual property holder of some critical elements for supply chain, not the least of which include our enterprise standards for sustainability and the SCOR model, which many of you are probably familiar with, the supply chain operations reference model. which has been in existence since 1997, is the most prolifically used model to help to diagnose and improve supply chains around the globe. And we're super happy to be partnered with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation because we do share the mission of making the world better.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So to get us started, let's talk a little bit about the circular economy, because I think probably a lot of people in the audience are familiar with this concept already if they're watching this. But it would be great, Andres, if we could briefly tell us about this concept, this idea of the circular economy. And yeah, I guess just to give them a little bit more of our perspective on this topic.
Sure thing. So put simply, the circular economy is a better alternative to our linear system. So currently, a lot of our economy is based on a take, make, waste model, where we extract materials from Earth, we turn them into products, and then shortly after we've used them, we dispose of them as waste. Now, the circular economy offers an alternative to increase resilience within our supply chains, but also in general to provide better growth for businesses, better opportunities for society, and a better planet. Now, when we turn that into actual, when we look at the materials flows within the circular economy, which I'm sure a lot of supply chain professionals will love, we can look at this diagram that will now be on your screen. So this is the butterfly diagram, and if you look at the center of it, you can see a line going from raw material extraction all the way to production and the consumer, and then ultimately in a linear system as waste. When we turn our attention to the outer loops, you can see how the circular economy plays and becomes a reality. So on the left-hand side, we have the biological cycle, which is a technical term just to talk about anything that comes from Earth. So the food that we eat, or the textiles, the fabrics that we use to make our clothes. And that is circulated within the economy, within a circular economy, in a way that brings the nutrients back to Earth. When we look at the right-hand side, we're talking a bit more about durable materials. So things like a washing machine, or a phone, or a laptop. And those are things that are kept in the economy with a bit more technical processes, such as reuse or repair, or you can share those laptops, those washing machines. When they're no longer fit for purpose, you can refurbish them, you can remanufacture them, and ultimately, and as a last resort, you can use the materials in them, take them out through recycling, and create new products with them. But I do want to prioritize and put the emphasis on the prioritization of each loop. So we start with the smaller loops to make sure that the materials and the value embedded within them are kept in circulation at the highest value.
Okay, well, one thing that I forgot to say in the beginning, and I really wanted to tell our audience, is that we're having this event because we have recently published a new white paper co-authored by the Circular Supply Chain Network called Building a Circular Supply Chain. And so I guess, Andres, I want you to tell us a little bit more about the context behind this paper. Why did we decide, as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, to move in that direction, to look at supply chains and to really bring that together with the concept of the circular economy in our, I guess, most recent research? Yeah,
and I'm sure Deborah will go into it in a second. But the answer is really twofold. On the one hand, we see companies making those big commitments, but also making a lot of progress. And as they progress in the transition to a circular economy, they are starting to look into their supply chain and how they can enact change beyond themselves, looking into the suppliers and the customers that they've got. And the second reason is really to investigate how the circular economy could be used as a solution framework by supply chain professionals to address some of the topics that are most pressing for them, such as resilience or reducing greenhouse gas emissions or just cutting costs within their supply chain.
Perfect. So, Deborah, what did we find out? We went on this journey, we tried to figure out the answers to some of these questions that Andres was just pointing out. So what did we actually find out? How do these topics relate to one another?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I see a two-way street here. One, the supply chain organization within the brands that we hope will transition to a circular economy are absolutely critical. They are the ones that go and find, buy, move, make, transform, bring back materials all around the world. So on the transition piece, very important for those interested in circularity to go and find the supply chain. And traditionally, these audiences haven't been talking to each other as much as they really should be. On the other hand, for supply chain professionals, I find that circularity and a circular mindset, which I'll explain in just a moment, really gives us a chance to look at our supply chain and processes in a new way. We have a lot of tools for innovation and process improvement and transformation. And we've used these tools to try to find every last piece of waste or inefficiency and potential to change our supply chains. Sometimes bringing in a totally different mindset can help us find an innovation in a way that we haven't looked at it before. So I think there's a nice two-way benefit for both the circularity side and the supply chain side. If we think about what makes up a circular supply chain, as we tried very hard to find a good definition for it across the organizations we spoke with, there's really three components. And we can put up the slide, I think, so you can all have a look at our attempt, which I think is very cool, to show the multi-directional flow of money, information, and goods. What I like about this diagram is that each node in the supply chain you'll see has two colors, which means it's a supplier and a customer. Because when we think about the butterfly diagram that Andres explained, when we have a world that's more focused on repair and reuse and remanufacture and refurbishment than we do about building new, then we have buybacks, we have sellbacks, our customers become our suppliers, our competitors might become customers and suppliers, and the relationship we have across our ecosystems change. So I like that piece, and you can have a look at this as I briefly explain our version of what makes up a circular supply chain, which really gets back to the key three principles of the circular economy. And I find there's a lot of focus on the second principle, which is circulate, which Andres just explained. But they're really meant to be taken in order. So the first one is eliminate. This should feel familiar to supply chain professionals who've tried to do a lean out, cost out, any type of lean management, zero waste to landfill. This is our bread and butter. We know how to do this. But circularity takes it one step further. It gives us a way to look at our 7 deadly wastes of lean and say there is another way. We don't have to accept overproduction. We don't have to accept inventory. We don't have to accept transportation. We can actually make our supply chain shorter by moving operations closer to the user, which we're seeing a huge trend in it now with reshoring, friendshoring, all the different shorings that we're seeing. And so we can start to imagine our supply chains in a completely different way. So the first one is really eliminate, but go big, transformational, eliminate on that one. The second one is circulate, and that's what Andres was explaining, really about how do we use distributed regional repair facilities to keep items in use for as long as possible. And the third one is tough to get our heads around, it's regenerate. It's really about how do we take the areas around our supply chain operations and leave it better than how we found it. That might be the way that we set up a facility so that the water and air and plant life around our facilities is actually healthier than when we were there to begin with. Or it might be the way that we source and transform materials for use in our supply chains, which is really cool, and there's some great material science happening, but I'll pause on my thought. So check this out, it's on the website, both on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website and the Circular Supply Chain Network website, and there's a great short fact sheet that goes along with the white paper, so you can flip through that as we have the rest of our conversation.
So Deborah, I'm curious about one thing that I saw on that slide that we had just up. Could you define briefly what circular inputs and processes are? Because we have mentioned them a couple of times and the audience might have seen them. What do we mean when we say those words?
Absolutely. Put simply, and then I'll give it a longer answer, even though you said brief. Today, most of our materials come from the planet. They're called virgin materials or primary materials. They've never been used before. It's their first go-round. A secondary material or a circular input has been around the block at least once. So that might be something that's been used before. Ideally, it's a finished good. The perfect circular supply chain sources a finished good, does as little to it as possible, and gets it back to a user as quickly as possible. Utilization is key. So it might be a finished good, it might be a component that we have refurbished and we can use again, or it might be a material that is renewable in some way, or regenerative for extra bonus points. And renewable would be on the left side of the butterfly diagram that Andres explained. So something that can grow quite quickly. Some define it as regrowable within 10 years. Or regenerative. So you'll see a lot of really cool material science right now, for example, pulling carbon out of the air and making party dresses and tennis shoes and vodka and building materials and diamonds straight out of this material in the air. So that would be an idea of regeneration.
Okay, thank you. And Douglas, we haven't forgotten about you, I promise. And I would like to ask you a question now, because I guess building circular supply chains will transform the ways in which supply chain professionals will approach their work. And I know that your organization has a model that showcases kind of like the core supply chain process areas, if you might, and how and provides guidance to those people using it on how to optimize them. So I was wondering if you could explain to our audience a little bit more about what this framework, this model, the SCOR model, is, and how does it link to the circular economy?
Yes, and in fact, we can take a look at the SCOR model on the slide. But let me start by just reinforcing one of Andreas's points. So, progress is being made, and we should celebrate that, but we shouldn't get too happy. The reality of it is, and we do a lot of work in our collaboration efforts with the UN as well, but I think we see these macro factors that are happening around us that really caused us to revisit the SCOR model construct to better represent the circular economy inside of a supply chain. So the mega factor around us is that organizations and countries are much stronger on their statements relative to aspiration than actually truly operationalizing these concepts into the supply chain. And since our SCOR model is used to drive improvements in supply chain and design what the future state should actually look like, and take that aspiration down into a degree of reality, we felt it necessary to revisit the SCOR model and redesign it, because the SCOR model in its previous version looked very linear, right? And if we're going to educate people, and that's what our organization does, educate and inspire people to design that future state, we had to change the model to better represent circularity into it. And if we have that slide, we can talk a little bit about that, but you'll see that the diagram of that, if you will, represents that it isn't a linear supply chain. It is dynamic. It doesn't go in the same sort of sequential flows that we would like to think about it. We're getting hit with demand and supply shocks all of the time, et cetera. But we also do need to be thinking about how circular concepts fit into the supply chain. When we think about circular economy, we think about it's the intersection between the design chain and the supply chain. If we're left to Deborah's comment, if we're left to the bottom, which is, I'll put like recycling towards the bottom of my list of options, right? We're left with that as a result because we didn't connect the design chain and the supply chain together. If we really want to think about other concepts like regeneration, reuse, repurpose, et cetera, it has to come from the design side into the supply chain so we can effectively manage that. And as Deborah also mentioned, these are audiences, these are functional silos in many instances that don't have that conversation enough. So our SCOR model introduced the Orchestrate 13 concept. It's very heavily represented in the white paper that we also had a small part in playing and developing with you. But it really is about bringing that into the supply chain more formally and helping these organizations realize their goals and move from aspiration to operationalizing sustainability and circularity concepts into the supply chain. And our mission is to develop not only the model, the construct to do that, but also training and education programs to support that for organizations as well, making it a reality.
Thank you so much, Douglas. And now I have a series of questions for the three of you. I'm going to put each question, I'm going to ask one of you to address the question, but please feel free to jump in. And Douglas, we might just need you to make a bit of noise just so that we know you want to jump in, but let's keep this in mind.
Not a problem.
So, Deborah, I guess we have explained the concept of circular supply chains. We have briefly spoken as well about how we see that supply chains is connected or connects to the topic of a circular economy. Are there examples already out there? And where are we in this journey? Like, do we have, pioneers, businesses who are leading the way? What would be your kind of like view on this?
Absolutely. Look, I'm going to give a two-part answer. One is there is work being done today that we don't know is part of a circular economy. And the other is, yes, there's really cool pioneers using really cool technology, and I'll mention a few of those. To Douglas's point, yes, we are doing a lot of good work, and no, it's not enough yet. So my first one is a shout out to all of the reverse logistics and returns professionals out there. Often the team forgotten, if I just mentioned the old linear SCOR model for a moment, almost always pronounced as plan, source, make, deliver. And then we forget that there's a return at the end. And now I'm thrilled with the new SCOR DS model that has transform instead of make, indicating we can also repair or refurbish an item. And I think it really does beautifully explain the complexity that supply chains are managing. So first, look, the returns space, I think, is going to be the superheroes of tomorrow. It's very, very difficult to go backwards in a supply chain, both physically, but really information flow and money flow wise, it's very difficult to do a return. Our returns colleagues have figured out how to do this in spite of everything. And so they already have these interesting ways of getting around some of the challenges and constraints we have. So anything returns related, congratulations, you are already participating in a circular economy. And I think the most important part after reuse, of course, is really repair and refurb. Then, yes, we do have some really cool innovators who are doing work across all three of those principles I mentioned earlier. So if we think about eliminating a supply chain, eliminating waste in our supply chain, which in some ways eliminates a whole section of the supply chain, we can look at the extreme where we've seen organizations put manufacturing lines or services in a shipping container and plop that down to a local market to really move the factory closer to point of use. We've seen this done by Unilever. We've seen this done by Microsoft with data centers, and perhaps most impressively with BioNTech with the COVID vaccine, to be able to go in and serve local markets, which really eliminates that waste piece of transportation. Also allows us to have way less inventory in the system, which allows us to do it faster and cheaper than we would have already. So we have innovators like that. We've got innovators who are certainly taking back items who perhaps we wouldn't have expected to be able to. Somebody like an IKEA has been a huge leader in the space to take back items. In athletic apparel, we're seeing a lot of co-opetition where you can send any of your shoes back to any of the brands, and they're working together to figure out how to make best use of that. Equally, in athletic apparel, we see shoes made from carbon pulled out of the air. So again, with this idea of really innovative materials hitting on that third principle of regenerate. So lots of really interesting examples. There's even more inside the white paper, which I'm sure you've already opened.
Is there anything, Douglas, Andres, that you would like to add in terms of examples already out there, or where, what's your take on where we are on this journey?
Yeah, I think certainly the examples that Deborah gave are leading. And a lot of those, as you recognize, the brands that Deborah mentioned are consumer-related goods, because I think the consumer does care about the sustainability aspects of the product in which they're paying money for. I think there are lesser examples in B2B businesses, and I'd like to see that on the increase. The one thing I will mention to Deborah, reinforce Deborah's point, I'll be at the Reverse Logistics conference next week or in 2 weeks, talking exactly about this concept in collaboration with the National Retail Federation. But 20% of the companies around the globe have a specific reverse logistics strategy, 20%. So we're much more mature on our forward logistics than we are in the reverse, and hopefully, but also remember that reverse logistics is on the increase relative to the volumes associated with e-commerce. The last point I'll make again about these examples is it is easier to design circularity in a greenfield environment. When we're trying to move from linear to circular, we have to organizationally unlearn linear. And that is a change management issue. So one of the things that we help organizations with from a transformation perspective is how to do the unlearning, how to change the operating model to account for these new ways of working, like introducing circular economy. So it is much easier to design it in from the onset than it is to unlearn for a lot of these organizations. And I think some of the consumer the consumer items, the CPG world, et cetera, are moving slightly swifter than some of the sort of B2B organizations, industrial manufacturing, aerospace and defense, for example.
I'm learning myself a lot. So I hope that people online are also, because I had no idea that 20% of the organizations already had kind of like a reverse logistics strategy. Are those the right words? I think so. So following on that, on like how organizations have to unlearn a lot, which I think is a really important point, I also wanted to ask you, and Andres, I will start with you. In the paper, we outline 9 focus areas where we think, the moving towards circular supply chains will kind of like have implications for organizations and businesses specifically. Where do you see, I guess, the biggest or the most relevant areas or opportunities, let's say, and how do we go about addressing them? Because I feel like hopefully we have a lot of supply chain professionals watching us online, and they might be asking themselves this question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And that is something that we were really interested in doing throughout the research. How can we make sure that it's very solutions oriented? And if you're a supply chain professional, you can tomorrow start taking actions. So we did outline in the white paper those 9 areas that supply chain professionals can focus on. 5 of them, and they'll be on the screen in a second, 5 of them are things that supply chain professionals can do themselves. And there are things like how the teams are organized, how they can engage with suppliers, how the data system needs to be developed in order to, for example, take into account those reverse flows. I won't go into all of them because there's a lot, but the last 4 are the things that supply chain professionals need to collaborate with other functions in order to address. And those are things like policymaking, for example, engaging with your public affairs department in order to try to influence legislation that can be supportive of a circular supply chain. Or there are things like product design, and that's a great example. And by the way, as Deborah said, the white paper is full of examples of how companies are already taking action. But on the business model and product design, there's an example on the white paper on how Philips, for example, tried to develop a rental model for one of their devices, and it's called Lumea, and they put it out at first, but then when they came back to when the reverse logistics team were dealing with the items that were being returned within that model, they realized that a lot of them were not designed for refurbishment. So it was that insight loop within the organization where the supply chain team had to give feedback to the product design team. And it's what Douglas was talking about, the kind of combining the design chain and the supply chain to make sure that the circular business model can go ahead and work efficiently.
So, Deborah, what if a supply chain professional is wondering, how do I talk to my team about this? Like, let's say we convinced the audience, they are now like ready to find out more about this. How can they talk to their teams in a way that maybe resonates with them?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of ideas. First, think about this as an innovation tool. I would stress to not use circularity as the goal. Instead, use it as a path to get to what you already need to deliver on this year. So very likely that has to do with cost. We always have to find some money somewhere in our operations, and with lead time. And so if we think about fundamentally changing the way that we do supply chain and imagine that we start with a finished good instead of with a raw material. And if we don't start from the planet every single time and have to go through all of our up supply chain tiers, we can actually go faster and we can actually be cheaper. Now, this does require the right infrastructure, the right partners, but it is possible to do, and there are some brands who are figuring this out. If you have purchased a refurbished electronic recently, for example, the margins on that are pretty great. So we see this shift happening for supply chain teams. So imagine the circularity as a tool set, not as a goal. Try to lean into some storytelling. There's some really nice frameworks and examples and already made decks at the Ellen MacArthur website. And February 7th, there is an intro to the circular economy for supply chain professionals hosted by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So get the basics in place, make sure that you understand it together, or you can just dive in together and say, look, these are the 3 principles. Here's a white paper. Let's go through the definition together and figure out what does this mean for our supply chain, and ask yourselves questions in the format of how might we. Don't try to list all the reasons why it's never going to work. We are very good at doing that. But imagine instead, how might we XYZ? How might we repair more than we build new? How might we have a distributed set of partners instead of globally centralized? And start to imagine and challenge each other, have a little debate, and you'll grasp the concepts quite quickly by getting your hands into it.
Deborah, you stole my big announcement today for the audience.
Shoot.
No, that's great. But I'm just going to take 1 second here just to say to our audience, if you are interested in learning more about the circular economy, or if you have colleagues in your organizations that don't know anything about the circular economy, we are going to be hosting a webinar, as our speaker just said, on the 7th of February. Hopefully one of my colleagues is going to now put the link in the chat. So please register for that and share it with your teams. And Douglas, I don't know, you might want to make a point on any of the things that Andres and Deborah have just said, but I wanted to ask you as well, how do we ensure that supply chain professionals are ready to accelerate the transition to a circular economy? Because you spoke about the need for these organizations to unlearn a lot. You might tell me that they are already ready, but yeah, I want to hear your take on this.
Well, maybe first just reinforcing one of Deborah's points, because I think part of that unlearning, part of that change management is to be realistic about keeping the focus, not necessarily on the means to the end, like, let's go do circular, but rather what are the results that can be achieved by introducing that conceptually into what you do every day. So I think that results orientation is also very critical. It's also one of the reasons that we added a lot of those results-oriented sustainability metrics into the SCOR model in addition to OE13. So just wanted to sort of reinforce that. So we're a very customer-centric organization. So we have to listen to what these needs are. And part of those means that the basic education is necessary across the organization. Which is why we introduced our 2-day course, Building a Sustainable Supply Chain, because let's not assume, we the 4 of us live in the world every day, right? But let's not assume that people in the supply chain, depending on the role in which they have, or the critical, what I call supply chain adjacent support organizations, people like finance, for example, they need to understand these concepts as well. So I think, part of the change management is to be realistic about the acceptance of that change in the organization, what education, training, upskilling needs to get done. Don't limit yourself to people in supply chain. Remember, supply chain impacts a lot of different functional aspects. And so education for supply chain adjacents is also critically important. And then maybe also to just reinforce the messaging is celebrate the successes, publicize them, make sure that the organization takes advantage of the good work that's done. If we create success in isolation, it's not going to assist our change management efforts. So I think that's also critically important. And this education unlearning is, is certainly top of mind. And that's at every level. That's at the CEO level on down. The last point I'll make is that the struggle with this is, if you think about it, organizationally, who owns sustainability? You could look at 10 different organizations, and the accountability for that may sit in 10 different places. It isn't an easy of a problem to tackle, because the organizational accountabilities is very bifurcated. It can sit anywhere. It could be in a CEO's hands. It could be a CFO's hands. It could be someone who has a dedicated role in ESG or sustainability, et cetera. So finding the audience that can drive change is one of the biggest struggles organizationally that we have, because sustainability, accountability isn't the same as many other functions, right? We know who owns auditing, right? It's finance, right? When you take sustainability, it gets a little mixed up in terms of the organizational structure, ownership, and accountability.
Nice. Well, we have time to get to a couple of things that have been happening in the chat on LinkedIn, just because I would like to acknowledge what people are doing on the other side. We had a few, well, first of all, I'm very pleased to see that we have a very globally spread audience. We had comments from people all across the world, so that's great to hear. That's what we want. And I wanted to bring up one of them, because everything that we do at the foundation, we like to take a systems kind of like point of view. So we like to talk about all the actors who have some power to change the status quo, let's say. So one person on LinkedIn has said that we hear a lot about the need for unlearn and change for professionals, particularly because the forward process is what we inherit. And they are asking, what would you say about the progress to be made by the regulators, the legislators, who have also aligned themselves with the forward and will have to adapt and change? I don't know if any of you would like to take this question and share a perspective.
Well, Douglas was recently at quite an event that I feel like he's in a great position to start this one.
Certainly a topic at COP28. So having the luxury to represent the organization there. But undoubtedly, regulation is becoming a bigger part of the game, and let's understand why. The lack of progress is always going to lead to more regulation. The more regulated and the more that we delay doing the right things means that fulfilling the regulatory requirements and remaining in compliance is going to be more difficult and more expensive. So, and we can see this clearly starting in the EU, who is the leader in my mind for driving this in driving circularity and sustainability concepts into action. So if you're sitting on the US side or you're sitting in other regions, just expect that more regulation is certainly going to come. So being proactive, diagnosing the supply chain, looking for those opportunities to introduce circularity and other sustainability concepts into what you do every day, knowing that the change is going to be lengthy and difficult, will make your ability to comply in forthcoming regulation much easier. We shouldn't deny ourselves. Our UN progression on overall on the SDG goals is lackluster at best. Depending on who you talk to, it's maybe 20% of where we should be 50% in terms of progression. So I think we can expect more regulation. I think that we can keep a watchful eye on what happens in Europe and anticipate what happens to the balance of the globe. And being proactive is easier and less expensive.
Optimistic view here. There's two pieces of regulation trends that are happening that I'm actually pretty excited about. One is a large number of right to repair laws being passed, which is fantastic. That is mostly focused on consumer goods and gives us the chance to truly own what we have, which is where we see a shift from smartphones being super glued together to now actually being able to be repaired. So you don't have to buy a brand new phone, which are quite expensive. We also see a carbon-focused regulation, particularly in Europe, although they exist in other parts of the world, called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And what's interesting about this is essentially the one in Europe says anything that's a high carbon material coming in will eventually tax you, so please get ready via reporting. I think this will inspire two actions. One, it will change the way that material is made outside of the EU to be brought in, or it will inspire and accelerate the creation of a circular materials marketplace inside the EU. And this is exciting to me because unless we have some of these regulatory pushes, there aren't very many reasons except for shortages, which we're also experiencing, to actually move towards a circular materials marketplace. And I will say we do see shortages across many different industries, which are inspiring take-back, buy-back models, which are also, I'm very optimistic about.
Nice. Well, we love to end these kind of events on a positive note. So thank you so much, Douglas, Deborah, Andres, for being here with me today. And well, to our audience online, remember the date, the 7th of February, we will be running a free webinar on the circular economy and the topic as well of circular supply chains. So please sign up to that, download the paper, have a look at our fact sheet, and yes, we will be hopefully sharing more on all our social media channels soon on this topic. So thank you so much for watching online and see you soon.